Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2. The Year 8 Season 2 public test server is live as of today. We're going to have plenty to dive into over the next few days, but I wanted to first deep dive on the new PVE Dark Zone. I would say this is the thing that generated the most discussion in the community after yesterday's announcement. On the one hand, you had lots of excitement from PVE players who just want new cool stuff to play and previously didn't have much room to explore and relax in the regular DZs. But then also frustration from PvP players who think that this goes against the core ideals of the DZ, as well as detracts from the available and already limited PvP content within the game. So before we get into this, I just wanted to address my stance on this all. I got a number of comments on yesterday's news coverage who seemingly mistook what I was really getting at by voicing some skepticism over this. So to be perfectly clear, I have no intentions or desire to gatekeep content from anyone. People want to experience more of the game, that's cool, I'm all for it. And even as a PvP inclined player myself, I can admit that the idea of a 12-person collaborative environment where the challenge is raised to require up to 12 people to cooperate and combine their builds and power to tackle the content, that sounds rad. I think it's a reason why a lot of people liked the premise of the Division Resurgence's open world. In that game, you can dynamically come across people in the map and team up. The only skepticism that I've ever had in regards to a PVE Dark Zone is that if it is not implemented properly, it risks devaluing the PvP Dark Zones if those do not offer proper reward compared to the PvE version, given that you are taking on the added risk of PvP by playing in there. At the end of the day, the Dark Zone is not a PvP zone. It is a farming zone with an extraction risk-reward loop that has PvP present to heighten the stakes. But that all being said, due to the added mechanics and challenge that is present in this presentation of the PVE Dark Zone, and due to the PvP Dark Zones specifically seeing a reward resource buff to compensate, I am relatively happy with how they've done this. And after playing through the PVE Dark Zone today on the PTS, my first impressions are this is pretty fun. I haven't even gotten close to experiencing the chaos that I imagine will ramp up if you get 8, 9, 10, 12 people all in one location. So that all is not overly relevant to the remainder of the video. I just wanted to address the PvP versus PvE discussion that's been going on. We will certainly discuss it more as time goes on, I'm sure. But for the rest of this video, we're going to be focusing on what the PVE Dark Zone is, how it works, and what my thoughts on it are. So let's waste no time and get straight to it. As we do, have to give a major shout out and thank you to our channel members as always. Thank you all so much for your continuous support and contributions towards this channel and my content. Alright, so on its surface, the PVE Dark Zone works relatively similar to the DZs that we are already accustomed to in the Division 2. It is a seamless opt-in, opt-out zone. There can be up to 12 players maximum in one instance. You have landmarks and supply drops as the primary content offerings, and then you collect and extract your contaminated loot. The one big change, of course, is that the rogue system is removed. There's no way to flag on other people or engage in PvP in any way. That said, the PVE Dark Zone is a Year 8 Season 2 specific content piece, and so in light of that, the zone has been modified to thematically fit this season's narrative, and there are a couple of extra elements that have been added in to aid that. For one, given that the hyenas are the main threat for this update, that is the only faction that you're going to find in here. And related to that, the big thing tying this all together is the toxicity meter, which is something that is visible on the upper left screen below the radar. Essentially, the longer that you're in the PVE DZ, the higher that meter will fill, and each bar that fills up results in stacking debuffs as well as a continuous hazing of your screen. Now, what I learned upon playing this is that this toxicity mechanic matters, and you will notice these debuffs. I believe it's just the second bar that results in a 30% reload and weapon handling reduction, so 60% slower reloads overall. That's just one of a number of different debuffs that will get applied to you. And so while something like that sounds punishing, which it is, I do like the added challenge that this brings. Given the fact that PvP is absent, I think that beyond the inherent farming efficiency opportunities of all these people grouping up, it does further reinforce the idea of people running together in the PVE Dark Zone. Even if you are not physically within a group with someone else or otherwise communicating, it incentivizes that people run support and healer builds to compensate for these debuffs, and I just think that it adds a neat extra layer of consideration and tactical planning when managing your build or your team comp. It's important to note that you are not stuck with these toxicity debuffs forever. Anytime that you enter within a DZ checkpoint or safe room, you will fully cleanse yourself. And although it was not stated in yesterday's dev stream, the patch notes do confirm that you can also reduce your toxicity counter by activating one of the surged active modifiers. And so that is further incentive to participate in this season's loop, which is to play and extract resources from the PVE DZ, upgrade your modifiers at the base, and that in turn powers you up to help combat toxicity. The other big component here is then the dynamic difficulty scaler. Essentially, this is how it works. If you were to load into a PVE Dark Zone entirely by yourself, then the challenge levels that you'd find should feel relatively similar to how the current Dark Zone is, which is set to challenging difficulty. However, the more people that are present in one PVE Dark Zone instance, even if you are not grouped up together or nearby one another, the tougher the enemies then become. Again, I really like this, as I think it ensures that even a 12 stack running together should still have some challenge. Again, I've not yet tested that, but then also, because it is a blanket increase for the entire server, this further encourages people to seek one another out and take on landmarks and extractions together. So I tried to test this as thoroughly as I could in the limited playtime that I've had so far. The most I was able to find was 3 other people actively running with me. I believe there were also 1 to 2 other players elsewhere in the server, so likely around 6 people total in the instance. And I will say that you definitely noticed the uptick in difficulty. We weren't the most geared players out there, right? I believe we were all below SHD level 1000. I'm guessing that, like me, perhaps PC is not some of these people's main platforms. So assuming that this scaling continues properly, 12 players should cause it to get quite high, and I really think that could be a lot of fun when you consider all of the build combos, exotic talents, skill scaling that could come through that. It could lead to quite the firefights. Now, to address a few points and questions that you all may be asking by this point, I saw a lot of people asking in yesterday's video if contaminated loot would still drop on the ground for anyone to collect if you die. The answer is yes. Now, it is worth noting that they stressed in yesterday's dev stream that this is a very early build of the new season, earlier than they would normally deliver for a PTS, because they want to try and get maximum feedback. So on some of these points that we are addressing, we do not fully know what is intended versus what is still being worked on. So in that context, for now, contaminated loot drops for everybody to claim. I honestly think I prefer it that way. I'm beating a dead horse by saying it at this point, but once again, it incentivizes cooperation and teamwork to take on the content with others that you find in the zone, because obviously that's going to lead to less chances of you dying. I do also think that it should lead to us seeing more support builds, maybe even tank builds being used here on the higher scaling, because you want to try and manage the many adds they will run into as effectively as possible, and death has a punishment here. People don't want to die, otherwise their loot is going to get scooped up. That said, there are certain interactions here like Dark Zone chests, supply drops, all of that so far remains personalized. Loot, only one person or one group can get it. I wonder if that's something that they're going to change so that those things don't become a scramble to see who can get it first, but rather shared drops for anyone nearby, again to reinforce teamwork. Now, talking extractions, this is where it gets quite fun. They've made it so that hunters spawn in when you call an extraction, the number of them scaling depending on how many people are present at that extraction site. Now, unfortunately, unlike survival in the Division 1, where every player at an extraction zone got a corresponding hunter, this PVE Dark Zone is capped at 4, apparently due to last-gen console limitations. As best I can tell, you get 1 additional hunter to spawn in for every 3 agents present, so only if all 12 people were to be at one extraction site would you get 4 total to spawn in. I was unable to tell if they will actually retroactively spawn in if more people were to approach an extraction site mid-extraction. If that's not a thing and the game is only considering how many people are there at the time of the flare being shot, I do think that is something that should be addressed. Otherwise, what you will likely see is groups of 12 will just hang back, have one person run in, call the chopper, and then everybody can run in to gang up on the lone hunter that would spawn. But when it works properly, this is definitely quite the thrill. I will say when it's just one hunter that spawns in, at least with the current scaling present when I tested it, they did feel a little on the weaker side. Their damage was definitely lethal, but the health pools on them seem pretty low compared to Countdown, for example. However, once we got 2 of them to spawn in, things did get quite hectic quite fast, and I imagine that is where the scaling really picks up. So my main feedback here is that I just think it would be best to ensure that the hunters remain a threat at all scaling and group size variables, as I don't think you really want people trying to discover what the optimal spawning conditions are and then having that potentially influence player behavior away from the otherwise dynamic possibilities that the PVE DZ introduces. On the note of extractions, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that extraction ropes are still limited to 4 bags only at a time. If so, I really do hope there is a way they could adjust that, because again, you wouldn't want people running into 12-man for half an hour, let's say, slaying out at a bunch of landmarks, only then to scatter to extract since they couldn't all get their loot out at once. Strangely, the chopper timer is dramatically reduced here. It only takes like 6 seconds for it to arrive once you fire the flare versus the usual 90 seconds in the other DZs. I would be inclined to think that that is a bug, but if not, then I definitely think it should be higher, probably a minimum of like 30 seconds. Otherwise, I could see scenarios where people end up scrambling and running out of cover to try and hook their loot in drawn-out hunter fights, only to die as a result, which could lead to more frustration. So, that is the general loop of this all. There is one other big question mark that a lot of people are having right now, and that is the fact that the new PvP normalization layer is activated within the PVE Dark Zone. I shouldn't say new, per se. PvP normalization has always activated when you enter into the DZ, but this update specifically makes it far more significant as a mass PvP balance pass has been done, which, if you look at the notes, effectively has resulted in a big stat squish. The vast majority of talents across the board have been brought down in their power, and so that is very much influencing opinions and impressions, I would say, on that dynamic difficulty scaling that they have present here. Stuff like hunter difficulty, all of that, given the fact that our builds are categorically weaker with no shade levels, no expertise levels, all of that. I would say that it would likely be a lot more fun for people to not have this be a thing. Let people have access to their full power suite when within this non-PvP environment. Again, I want to stress this could very well just be an unfinished or work in progress aspect to the PTS, but if it's not, then yeah, I would encourage them to heavily consider removing all normalization from here, let people go wild, use their prototype gear, all of it. If the scaling and difficulty needs to be retuned to account for that, then so be it, but I do think that that would be a friction point and source of frustration for many if it does remain. Well, there you have it, folks. That is most of the info, most of my observations so far on the PVE Dark Zone. I think there is a lot of potential here. Again, the maximum party that I was running with today was 4. I'm hoping to get that number a lot higher over the weekend and see how wild things can get. The potential of this is really just an open world 12-player countdown session, which I think is rad. Again, as far as how this impacts the PvP Dark Zones, them leaving the DZ resource gain rate at 100% here, I think is absolutely the right call. I would likely feel much differently about all of this if that were not the case. This update is also delivering a DZ vendor overhaul with massively buffed rewards and relevance, and so I think having the PvP Dark Zone remain the best and most efficient spot to farm for that is great. I think a lot of the appeal with the PVE Dark Zone is going to be the seasonal loop, right? Powering up your seasonal modifier, better handling those toxicity levels, and I think that is the better path to go down, right? Allow the PVE Dark Zone to have its own incentive. Don't try and compete with what the PvP Dark Zones do. So those are most of my thoughts. I will be very curious to know what you all think after watching this, or if you've jumped into the PTS yourself. What do you think about the premise of this whole thing, the differences between the PvE and PvP Dark Zones, the difficulty that we are seeing present here in the PvE zone and its rewards? Stay tuned for more PTS coverage coming up. After this, I'm definitely shifting my focus to the PvP changes next, so that should be coming your way tomorrow. But yeah, plenty more ahead. That is all I've got for this one, though, folks. Thank you all so much for coming by and watching, and until I see you next, RogueGold. Ow. Oh! We just got a Ravenous! Haha! I might not be friendly. Let's go.
Coming to the Division 2.
Let's go.
And